for a circular wing subsonically. Supersonically, with a few modifications and tweaking to its shape to make it a little more like a delta wing, one might see a possible outcome.
John Frost always believed his original concept was achievable.
Despite the unfavorable results of the Avro testing, the work that John Frost had put into the supersonic project showed that in fact it could have flown. And unfortunately, with the money eventually simply stopping, the company shut down the entire project. All the technology went back to the United States, who's the real owners now at that point.
The highly classified flying saucer technology went to America. But were these apparent public failures covering up a more covert flying saucer project that later, indeed, would work? This is Jack Pickett. 40 years ago, he was a publisher of U.S. military magazines. He even had positive security clearance. On a visit to MacDill Air Force Base in Florida, he was convinced he saw real American Air Force flying saucers.
There was no mistaking what they were. They were flying saucers. There was 4 of them parked in a row down at that restricted area of the base, and they ranged in size from 20 feet across to about 45 feet to, say, 70 feet, and then the biggest one was 119 feet across. Perfect circles.
Jack Pickett had been invited to the Air Force Base to write an article on the recently decommissioned aircraft. Pickett was even shown some remarkable photographs of the aircraft in the hangar.
He showed me photographs of many of these aircraft in flight, in formation. He showed me photographs of them with jet escorts, regular type escorts, flying with them.
Military researcher Michael Schratt has been investigating the Pickett story for the last 10 years.
This one was 119 feet across.
Schratt has worked closely with Pickett to produce a series of photo reconstructions of the experimental aircraft which Pickett saw. What Pickett was shown seemed incredible, but he was assured that indeed these were real experimental flying saucers, and this was the evidence that they had actually flown.
I said, well, how fast did they fly and how high? He says, well, we achieved space flight with them. And I asked him pointedly, any aircraft that flew that high and that fast, why are you discontinuing them? Why are you scrapping them? He says, well, we've designed better versions with less maneuverability problems.
Pickett wrote his article and was ready to publish, but at the last moment the Air Force withdrew permission and took back all Pickett's photographs. He stands by his story and remains convinced of what he saw.
Well, I saw the photographs of them in flight. I walked up and touched the actual aircraft themselves. I really examined them, and it was, no question about it, it was a remarkable aircraft, and it looked just exactly like what flying saucers are supposed to look like. In between...
Michael Schratt is convinced by all the evidence that indeed Jack Pickett's story is true.
I believe that these were the original, true, authentic articles because I've spoken to Jack for over 4 years now. He's remained consistent throughout, never changed his story. The aircraft that Jack kicked the tires on were capable of 15,500 miles per hour, and I think that's one of the reasons why it's still classified to this day.
Pickett's claims came against a background of heightened Cold War tensions. At the beginning of the 1960s, American U-2 pilot Francis Gary Powers was shot down on a spy mission over the Soviet Union. In Europe, the Soviets had built the Berlin Wall, dividing east from west. And with the Cuban Missile Crisis, the world had come closer than ever before to nuclear catastrophe.
This could be the beginning of the end for the...
As in the 1950s, popular culture reflected the fear and paranoia of the times. And again, it latched on to the threat from outer space.
The nations of the world mobilized their armed might, rushing to defend the Earth against the unknown weapons of the super race from the Red Planet.
There was suddenly a wave of UFO sightings.
We jumped out of the car and stood by the side of the road just as this thing passed over our heads, barely above the treetops.
It was hovering over the house and it was moving side to side directly over this house.
And as far as what it was, I wouldn't have the slightest idea.
I've been researching UFOs for the last 25 years, and I do believe that most, but all of us, of the witnesses are reliable people having seen something strange in the sky. Most of the times they have seen man-made phenomena or natural phenomena, like weather balloons, planets, satellite re-entries, stuff like that. But there is actually a small but significant percentage of sightings that cannot find any explanation at this time.
But there was one explanation for these mysterious UFO sightings, and it didn't involve extraterrestrial creatures.
I'm a great cynic about UFOs, and I would say in a single sentence that practically every UFO, other than those that are being taken by using saucepan lids, every UFO other than those has probably been under contract to the U.S. Air Force.
In the 1960s, Alan Brown was working at the Lockheed Secret Experimental Skunk Works in the Nevada desert. It was a time when both Russia and America were afraid of each other's nuclear strike capabilities. The Russians relied heavily on satellite technology to spy on the United States. The Americans invested mainly on manned surveillance aircraft. Lockheed had built the top-secret U-2 high-altitude spy aircraft, designed for covert surveillance over Soviet territory. But it was vulnerable to enemy radar.
When the first U-2 was shot down over Russia by surface-to-air missiles, it was recognized even before that time that the U-2's life probably wasn't going to be very long because it was not designed from a stealth point of view, and it was seen that they would have to do something pretty drastic to make improvements.
Flying saucer technology might produce the ultimate aircraft, one invisible to radar. A competition was started to replace the U-2.
Lockheed, in fact, won the contract, and I was involved with that in an airplane called Have Blue. And the program did change very quickly from a confidential clearance to a top-secret clearance when it was realized just the enormity of what could be done with an airplane which was essentially invisible to radar.
Over the next 10 years, shrouded in secrecy, a new generation of stealth fighters was rigorously tested in Area 51, the U.S. government flight test base in Nevada.
There's no question that you have to have large-scale testing over a large area, which means that there's going to be people on the periphery who are seeing these funny-looking objects flying around, which immediately get reported in the popular press as coming from Mars, Saturn, or you name it.
So Jack Pickett's story might be true. Throughout this period, it was the U.S. Air Force that was developing aircraft capable of evading enemy radar. Just what the pioneers of flying saucer technology always promised. What's more, 12 years later, there was another witness who seemed to confirm Jack Pickett's account. Warren Botts, an ex-8th Air Force pilot, saw an identical flying saucer